If you're good at everything, you're not the best at anything.
Welcome to this week's Escape Your Limits podcast. Our guest today is passionate about bridging the gap between science and practical application of heart rate response to raise the bar when it comes to performance training. He has dedicated a lifetime to improving human performance and overall mental strength. With a cutting-edge approach to fitness and years of experience, he has developed efficient and effective master training teams around the world for major brands such as the UFC. Today, he will be sharing his extensive knowledge and expertise as we dive into his book, The Ultimate Heart Rate Training Guide. So please welcome Jesse N. Thomas, founder, president, and CEO of Fitness Deconstructed, to the Escape Your Limits podcast.
Jesse, thank you very much for joining us on our podcast today. And it's an interesting story. I was out running a few months ago, and I don't know if you know, but I'm quite a MyZone fan. I'm a Hall of Famer, and I've been using it for quite some time. And I, apart from just trying to beat all my friends and family and get more points than them, I kind of felt as I was a little bit out of touch in terms of what it is I was reading. So I was doing these sort of sprints in between my run, and I messaged Dave Wright, who's a kind of mutual friend who connected us. And I said, Dave, look, is there anyone who can kind of help me out on this thing? I said, personally, I'm interested to know more, but also I think it would be quite good for a lot of friends and family of mine that are using it to sort of give them a bit more of an insight into what it's all about. So he connected us. So it's a bit of a selfish episode, this one, but I really do appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Matthew. I'm really excited. Once I got kind of the word from Dave that he had connected the two of us to have this discussion, the sky's the limit in terms of the conversation that we could have here with heart rate training. And I know that we could go off on tangents for hours about the intricacies of heart rate training. But I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And hopefully we can get some questions answered that other people have as well, because it's undoubtedly not just you.
Yeah, that's right. So for those of you that haven't heard of you or not aware of you, I thought what would be good is give us a bit of background on yourself and how you came to, I guess, specialize or focus on heart rate training.
Sure. I'll try to give you the quick and dirty version. I've been working in the fitness industry for the past 22 years. I kind of grew up as a science geek looking for the science that spoke to me the most. And in high school, I kind of found the science of the human body, anatomy, physiology, and started strength training and really was excited about the potential of being able to, change the human body, to have the human body adapt to all these different things. And ultimately found myself starting a career doing personal training and group fitness, and quickly found myself leading team members and coaching coaches and trying to help them develop their skill sets in the industry. And ultimately, kind of over the course of my career, how I carved my way, my niche in heart rate training is it was just something that I came across about 12 years ago, and then about a decade ago, really, came across MyZone and really enjoyed the product because the user interface was so easy. I felt it was really easy to apply to my training, and I just started digging in to the details of heart rate training. And at that time, I was writing fitness programs for some commercial companies and commercial fitness clubs, and really doing a lot of research and development with heart rate training, both in myself and with all the different programs I was writing and experimenting with. And ultimately, kind of the conclusion that I came to with heart rate training in the industry is that you can have a great product like MyZone that tracks your heart rate, and you can have all of this great equipment to use to exercise and do all these different things. And what I found was there wasn't enough education out there for the kind of just the general population, the exercise enthusiast who's looking to use a heart rate monitor, and then coaches as well. There wasn't enough education out there for coaches unless they had gone to a university and got a 4-year degree or beyond in some sort of exercise science, exercise physiology, kinesiology. Both of which are degrees that I have. So I spent the time in school to learn all of those things. And I just knew that most people weren't going to be able to spend that amount of time. People needed to learn this stuff now. People don't have 4 years to spend in school. A lot of times, if they're deep into their career, they can't go back to school. It's just not feasible for them. So I wanted to create something that really educated the general population, as well as the coaches and the operators, the gym facility, club owner operators that are delivering this programming to all of these people. Most of them are doing a pretty good job out of it. A lot of companies could use a little bit of tweaking to get it dialed in a little bit better. But really, hands down, what it comes down to is the coach's ability to be able to deliver the experience that this company that they're working for is trying to deliver. And ultimately, I felt like that was the biggest gap missing in our industry, is an education and how to appropriately deliver heart rate training programs. And after seeing some of the other stuff that was out there, a lot of the other programs, like I said, are good, but they could be better. And I really felt that it was almost my duty, because I had spent so much time researching, to give back to the community. And so I ended up writing a book about heart rate training called The Ultimate Heart Rate Training Guide. And the focus of that book was to do exactly what I said, help bridge that gap between science and practical application for both the exerciser and the coach or gym owner operator, and have everybody get more out of the time that they're investing into this, because the operators got the money invested and they want people to see results. The person showing up every day, putting in the work, the time, the energy, wants to see results. The person who's coaching them wants to coach them to the best of their ability. So in this case, everybody wins. And I think, that's kind of how education goes anyway. The more educated people are, the better decisions they make, and the easier it is for them to reach goals.
So when I was preparing for this, I started looking online and YouTube, and there's a ton of stuff, as you know, millions and millions of different results as it relates to heart rate and heart rate training. But also what I found was there was a lot of conflicting information. So one person says that you should do this, another person says you should do that, and there's a lot of contradictions in there. So as I guess an expert, how did you go about deciding what were some of the principles that you felt were important to go ahead and actually teach others, and the things that weren't, and where did you kind of end up? Was there a sort of school of thought that you happened to follow? So yeah, just in general, tell us about that story, because I know you will probably get people in the same situation. They may have been taught in a particular way, and some of the things you may say may contradict that potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of opinions out there. There's lots of conflicting research out there. I think ultimately it comes down to someone's understanding of cardiovascular dynamics, and specifically how the heart goes into cardiovascular remodeling anytime it has any type of demand placed on it. So any exercise we do is going to place demand on the heart, and depending on that exercise, the heart is going to have to pump blood out to the rest of the body to transfer oxygen, gas exchange, energy, etc. And the more demand there is to pump blood to all these different muscles, then obviously the more it has to supply. So really, it comes down to the body's ability to adapt to supply and demand, and that is going to be kind of, when you start to dissect that, you take a person, where they're at on their fitness journey with their level of fitness, and you help them with, if they've determined their goals, now it becomes setting a plan to reach those goals. And for any individual, they might have the same goals, but their plans might be individually specific because of where they're starting, right? And so someone may have put in a lot of time to training their body to be able to handle certain intensities in a certain way, maybe doing more strength training, and someone might be doing more cardiovascular training on the other hand. And so these two types of individuals who are doing different training protocols have placed different demands on their heart. So their heart, which is a muscle, is going to adapt like a lot of other muscles do. When you ask it to do something, it tries to get better at doing it. That's the amazing thing about the human body is we can ask it to do something and it will actually adapt to being able to handle it more efficiently and more effectively. And then it just comes down to the frequency of those things being performed. So really, it's diversity of programming, overall training hours spent on a weekly training regimen, the intensities within those hours, the total volume of work that you're doing. And then, we could go down the list of things that are also involved in your ability to adapt with exercise and recovery, and how your heart rate might respond differently on any given day based on certain things like sleep, rest, duration, nutrition, hydration, recovery, the intensity of your previous few workouts, the amount of time spent in between those workouts. So there's all these other things that we have to consider. And so the nature of the beast really just becomes controlling as many of these different variables as we can, and trying to be as consistent as possible as we can with controlling these variables. And that's how you're going to attain your goals faster, by being able to control all these little things that really affect day in and day out our ability to perform at the level that we want to. And then wearing that heart rate monitor gives you that direct feedback of letting you know, are you doing the things that allow you to train how hard you want to be training, or are you not? And then, you can clearly see if you wake up one day and you strap on your heart rate monitor exercise and you're already 10 beats higher, or 10% higher, let's say, than you normally are before you exercise, well, something's up, something's going on. And you should look back at the day before and say, what have I done? What can I do differently that's going to allow my body to recover? Because that's a sign, typically, of elevated heart rate like that, that your body hasn't had a chance to recover fully. Therefore, you should not work out as hard that day. Maybe that day is your moderate intensity day, your yoga day, your Pilates day, your mobility day. But really, overarching, it comes down to that variety of intensity, that roller coaster of diversity that's going to allow people to reach their goals the way they want to, but then not just physical goals. We're talking about cardiovascular, capacity goals as well. Whether or not you're training for an event or you're just training for life, it kind of depends on both, either, sometimes both, sometimes one or the other.
Yeah. So when you kind of started on this research, and did you find there was anything that was, I guess, popular things that people were talking about that you sort of found were incorrect, or is a lot of the stuff that hits the headlines, is it all genuine and it just needs to be taught in a little bit of a or taught better than what it has been up until now, would you say?
Well, we could talk about high intensity interval training. That's a big buzz training these days, right? And what does that mean? And people go, oh, I'm doing high intensity interval training, and I'm wearing my heart rate monitor. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? What does high intensity interval training mean? Does that mean that I'm in the red the whole time? Does that mean that I'm in the yellow? Where do I have to be? So I think, helping to define a heart rate range that works with high intensity interval training is something that I've done, specifically looking back on Carvonen's research, and trying to figure out why they came up with the heart rate equation that they came up with. Because, after looking at all of the relevant research that's come out recently, granted, Carvonen, that was the late 50s, I believe, all of the recent research that's come out has shown time and time again that equation does not work. And I said, well, if that equation does not work, then why would heart rate reserve work?
Can you just if I just pause there for a second, could you
Sure.
just expand on that, just for me and probably other people that weren't aware of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So back in the day, in the 1950s, when Carvonen was doing research, they came up with all of their research with the Carvonen formula, 220 minus your age to get your predicted estimated heart rate max. And then based off of that, they came up with heart rate reserve equations. Now, this was specifically created for people, who are high risk cardiovascular patients. Where should somebody train if they're high risk? And then it got kind of brought into general fitness population, and because there was no other research at the time that had gone into training athletes and heart rate and all the above, it was more medical. And then after kind of more sports specific athletic research got people got their hands into heart rate training with athletes, really the Hunt equation now that's being used by most people is the most accurate. 211 minus 64% of your age. And that's not gender specific either, which is great. And I've found with most people who have not taken a maximal heart rate test, that equation can be very, very close. It's usually within a couple of beats because it doesn't do what the Carvonen equation formula does, which is basically subtract one heartbeat per year you age, every year that you age. And, up until a little bit ago, people just accepted that that's what happened and nobody questioned it. And I noticed right away about a decade ago when I was working with a heart rate monitor that equation was not accurate. I had loads of people in their late 40s, early 50s, mid 50s, early 60s, that whole generation of people that had heart rates that were way higher than this predicted heart rate max that Carvonen came up with. And I said, so that can't be accurate. And I started doing more research on it, and I found equations that were more accurate at predicting heart rate. But I think really the take home message of heart rate prediction is it's still just a prediction. It's still not your 100% accurate truth number of what your heart rate max is. We won't know that unless you actually do a heart rate max test. Okay. And so this equation, that Carvonen equation, was created for people to, not do a maximal test, to get a metric to use to create some training zone parameters around how somebody should get into cardiovascular condition. And that was what heart rate reserve is. So HRR, which lots of people have seen when they're reading heart rate research. And so, well, okay, potentially heart rate reserve could work, but in order for it to work, we would need that person to take a heart rate max test because we know the Carvonen formula doesn't work. And so there's certain people that should be excluded from a heart rate max test. They should just use the submaximal heart rate equation that, like MyZone uses. They use the Hunt equation, for example, until they're in physical condition that's good enough to actually take a maximum heart rate test. Because some people walk in on day one, I don't want you to do a maximum heart rate test on day one. I'm probably going to train you for at least a couple of weeks to maybe even a couple of months before I push you to that limit. It totally is individually specific. And now we're getting into the details of training people individually and taking individual approaches. So to come back to heart rate reserve, ultimately I said, well, if we're not getting an accurate prediction of somebody's heart rate with the Carvonen formula, how can we extrapolate heart rate reserve data and compare that to what that would equal to a percentage when you're using heart rate max, so a percentage of heart rate maximum? So that's essentially what I did. Is I did the math on every heart rate reserve associated with every heart rate max and every resting heart rate there within, and basically showed that in order for anyone, regardless of their exercise age, regardless of their fitness ability, their fitness capacity, regardless of that, that person can train at a specific range, within a specific range. And people side by side who are professional athletes in day one can train right next to each other doing the same exercises with the appropriate modifications. And they can use the same percentage range of heart rate in order for it to be considered high intensity interval training. And now that range is a lot wider than most people would think. It actually ranges from 68 to 93% in terms of heart rate max. And people go, well, they're talking about MyZone. They say 68%, that's in the blue zone. How can that be high intensity interval training? There's no way. Well, if you take an endurance athlete and you have somebody who mostly does endurance exercise, but they do a little bit of strength training and they do, enough to get a good balanced regimen for their endurance training, they're going to have a lot higher moderate capacity stamina and endurance. So when you put moderate loads into their hands, their heart rates are not going to elevate as high as you think. And I know a lot of people who wear a heart rate monitor who are in good shape go, yeah, that's me. Whenever I do strength training, I'm barely in the blue or the green. And part of that reason is probably because you are an endurance athlete who is not challenging their heart enough. their heart goes, yeah, I got this. This is no problem. Your muscles are being challenged. Sure, strength wise, yeah, you're being challenged. But your heart is so used to the overload of volume and pressure and blood flow of that sustained endurance exercise that you go out and do for an hour or 90 minutes or whatever. It's so used to just handling higher capacities that you spike that blood pressure a little bit, and the heart doesn't really recognize what's going on. It goes, yeah, I got this, I think I got this, is no problem. And then all of a sudden the muscles burn out because you're fatigued. So it really becomes about making the appropriate modification. That's the biggest thing. So regardless of where that person lands on their fitness journey, I can take the professional athlete or the person who's brand new on day one, and I can offer you a modification that's going to challenge you enough to get your heart rate to elevate to a level that brings you within the, ideally we want to be somewhere in the middle of that range, middle or upper. But again, that person who's really fit is going to respond to, their heart rate's going to take a lot longer to climb, and they're going to need to be challenged a lot more to see that heart rate elevation, and it's going to take more time. So they work better with longer intervals because they can handle more. Where that out of shape person walks in on day one, and you have them just do a body weight squat and they're already in the red, just like that. And then you rest for a minute and they're still in the red because their body's freaking out because it can't handle these capacities. It's not used to it. It doesn't recognize it. So really, it comes down to the person's physical capacity. How are they being challenged? How are with their challenge, are they getting a modification that allows their heart rate to be challenged enough to climb into that level that they want to challenge themselves at? And
So if I just jump in for a second
yeah,
then, Jesse. So just to
sure.
give an example, because I know some people that I've spoke to, myself included, we've been using MyZone for quite a while, a number of years now. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
one of the things that we've seen, like you mentioned, that if you're tired, your heart rate goes up. But one of the things I've certainly seen myself is if about 6 months ago, we did this MyZone challenge where we're sort of working out almost like every day, doing quite a bit of cardio and strength. But then as I started to get to the end of, so it's a 4-week challenge. So as I started to get into the third week, I found that very similar workouts, I was really struggling to get into the yellow. I was almost like staying in the green, and I'm like, damn, what's going on? Am I just tired, or what's going on? So why then would that happen? Because I guess you feel as though you're physically tired. You're doing the similar time, but you're dropping into a lower zone. What's going on there then?
So that's funny you should mention that, because I've noticed that more so with endurance athletes than people who are kind of brand new to exercise. Let's just call it the first 0 to 3, 3 to 6 months, somewhere around there. So when the person who's newer to exercise, and we're kind of diving into overtraining, because that's really why your body is responding that way. So a person who's less fit, when they overtrain, their body responds by let's say typically day 3. So when you do one high intensity interval training session, let's just call it 60 minutes. Next day you do another one. So you've done back-to-back high intensity interval training sessions, and then you go in for day 3. That's typically where you start to really see that difference in heart rate. Day 2, pretty much you can keep up. But day 3, that's where you go, whoa, this is not how my heart usually responds to these same exercises. And so when you're less fit, typically your heart rate jacks up a lot higher and you're in the yellow and red. But again, a lot of those things are dependent on the nutrition, hydration, alcohol consumption. There's all these other environmental factors that go into it. But those will make your heart respond either way lower or way higher, but definitely not normal. And so being aware of that is the first key. And you have to recognize, okay, my heart's not responding how it usually is, even though this is not an abnormal workout. I do this a lot. So let's take into consideration, what did you do the day before? What did you do the day before that? What did your sleep look like? What did your nutrition, your hydration, all these other things that are going to affect how your heart responds, and most importantly, recovers, because that's going to be your heart doing exactly what you just said. And especially near the end of a long, journey like that, 8 to 12 weeks, especially, Someone who's fit like you is going to get through 8 weeks kind of no problem without seeing that much effective overtraining. But then all of a sudden it starts to pile on, and every workout you do feels like you're in the yellow and red, but the heart rate shows that you're in the green and the yellow, or even sometimes blue, and you feel like you're working that hard, right? So that's a great reason to wear a heart rate monitor in itself. Pay attention to your body. Listen to your body telling you need to rest. It's just such a great tool to use across the board for so many reasons. Overtraining is just one good reason, especially for somebody who does a high volume of work. That's such an important thing. I can give you an example of overtraining. I did that for a year in college. I was overtraining, and the amount of hours that I put in, because I've always been in my own case subject, and I've done experiments on myself. The hours that I was putting in were immense, and it was a lot of work, and I hardly made any positive gains that entire year. In fact, I made some negative gains strength-wise, and my cardiovascular capacity stayed about the same. And it's because I was overtraining and constantly working in a state of partially recovered. Therefore, I could not push myself as hard as I wanted to. So recovery is such an important element, especially for those who are doing a lot of high-intensity interval training. You can get away with a lot of high intensity interval training, and it can be a big portion of your training regimen, depending on the amount of overall hours that you're putting in. And then, of course, all those other environmental factors that are going to affect recovery.
And so what you're saying then is if you are starting to see, if you've kind of got a regular pattern of working out, if you're starting to see where I know that workout, but I'm struggling to sort of get to the greens or the yellows or the reds, for example, that generally means that your body's not recovered and you probably need to rest and then go back onto it. Which I do sometimes when I do that, and I'll go back after maybe 1 or 2 days. I feel suddenly I'm like, wow, I'm even some cases in the red, and I'm not doing a lot different. Same duration of workout, but very different in heart rate. So I couldn't work out what was going on, but I think that makes sense. That really, look at your colors and try and understand that may need that you're overtraining.
Well, and then that can be a challenge in itself when you're a competitive person, and the challenge is to rack up the most points, and you get more points by being in higher energy zones, right? I say if you're in a challenge that, requires more points, work out at 80%. If you're trying to win that challenge, do the math. You can get 4 points per minute in yellow or red if you're in a my zone challenge. So why not just stay at 80%? You can get 4 points per minute. You don't have to kill yourself doing it. So point being,
So
though,
once
you should
you
have a
say
lot of
that,
variety. What's that?
Yeah. So when you say that, again, when I was looking into this, there was some debate between kind of HIIT training being good for duration, athletic performance, developing immunity, and then there was this steady state. And so what I was going to do, maybe define HIIT and steady state, and maybe if you can also talk about why in certain athletes are almost saying to not put your body under that pressure, that stress, particularly nowadays is what's going on, and just being able to sort of keep it at a lower level where you're able to develop more capacity. Could you talk about those two things for me? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. They both are very important components of a training regimen, and regardless of the person, both should be a component. Whether you're a professional athlete, putting in an endurance athlete, putting in a majority of kind of moderate, sustained endurance exercise where you're going to be spending a majority of your hours, let's just say on a bike, probably in the 50 to 70th percentile. So, mostly probably 60 to 70th. Blue, green zone, somewhere around there. But when you go out for those 3-4 hour rides, that's where you're going to spend a majority of your time. And I think it's really interesting to give people an example with colors to show, you get the bar graph with MyZone, right? You get to see all your colors, and you get to see all the blues, the greens, the yellows. And if you start to add up that work, when you look at the total volume of work that you maybe did for a high intensity interval training session versus the total volume of work that you maybe did on a moderately high sustained, maybe 1 hour of sustained endurance exercise, you're actually putting your body through a very similar amount of work in total, but the difference is the intensity, right? We're either revving it up and giving it more rest, or we're kind of staying more steady state. And both of them have a very positive effect on the neurological capacity of your heart, the neurological conditioning of your heart. And I think for a really long time, endurance athletes in particular have recognized the importance for that lower, that moderate, long, sustained endurance capacity to increase their overall capacity to be more efficient when they ride. What they've noticed with research is that when endurance athletes sustain that moderate intensity for a long duration, their heart actually becomes more efficient and effective at sending that neurological signal through the SA node. With a more efficient heartbeat, the stroke volume becomes more efficient. Basically, all of your body's motor neurons become more efficient and effective at coordinating your body. But part of it is your heart's ability to being able to push all of that blood out to the body. So with that sustained energy, that sustained endurance exercise, we get just that kind of that long-term conditioning of having your heart go, yep, I know exactly what I need to do to beat right here. I've got this under control. And then you've got kind of the high intensity roller coaster, if you will, of challenging your body to recognize this high intensity. And then all of a sudden recognize that it's not doing any work. And then recognize again that it's at high intensity and then not any work. And so really what you're doing is between both of those kind of far ends of the spectrum, and then everywhere in between, it all just becomes differences in having your body adapt to being able to find homeostasis. It's always looking for homeostasis. So it's always looking to be able to do what you're asking it to do more efficiently. So and that comes to consistency, right? If you do any one of those types of variations, more consistency, if you're more on the endurance end, your body's going to get really good at that moderate endurance. If you do a lot of the high intensity interval training stuff, your body's going to get really good at the high intensity explosive stuff that is, for those intervals that you're working at. And if you do all of it and everything in between, then you're going to be good at everything. But that brings up another point. If you're good at everything, you're not the best at anything. So you have to be willing to make up your mind. Do I want to try to work my hardest to be the best at this? Or do I want to diversify my training portfolio and try to be good at everything? And it just depends on where you're at in life. Some people who are maybe younger and more competitive, they've got their game face on, they want to spearhead it. And some of us who are a little bit older, getting into 50s, 60s, that kind of thing, we're thinking about, I just want to be able to get up every day, not be sore. I want to go and do the fun, active things that I want to do without putting myself at higher risk of injury and not feel like I'm, the next 2 days I'm going to be so sore that I can't even get out of bed, right? So everyone's on a different journey. And we just have to, be specific to everyone's journey. If people are trying to reach goals, there's ways to do it, and there's ways to do it individually and in group settings, and with all this variety of endurance and high intensity interval training. So everyone needs some sort of variety of both or everything in between, because if you train your body too far one way and one, I mean, most of us have seen before, you see an endurance athlete that comes in and tries to do really heavy strength training stuff, struggles with it. And on the coin flip, that strength athlete that goes to try to do anything endurance struggles with it. So you can be good at all of the above. And you may never be the best, but you can certainly be good at all of it.
So talking for the general person, I guess not an elite athlete, but people that want to live life to the full, energy, they want to have good immune system. What would you say works for them? And I'll add a little bit to it, and maybe you can kind of explain what it means. But when I've experimented with different things, different ways of training using heart rate, and one of the things that I've found that's been quite successful for me is to do some steady state for a period of time, which seems to kind of elevate my heart rate. And then when I do hit, instead of kind of having to, if I just started with regular hit training that they do in a lot of studios, I feel that the effort that I need to put in, whether that's doing kettlebells or sprints or whatever, I almost have to kind of really put a lot of stress on my body. Whereas if I do the steady state, which can be fairly easy really, and then I get in the gym and I'll put together like a 20, 30-minute circuit using kettlebells and weights and that sort of thing, I seem to be in a level, and I'm kind of going up and down, but I don't feel as I'm sort of breaking myself down as the same way as if I did it the other way. What's going on there, and should I be doing that type of training? Or
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. You've figured it out, Matthew. You've figured out the secret to your training at your level of fitness, and that is the key. People need to understand how important the warm-up is. So that is one of my biggest issues when you get into a boutique studio. Yes, it might have a lot of diversity within the programming, but the warm-up is the same for everybody. And because everybody is at a different level of fitness, everybody needs a different warm-up. And the more fit you are, cardiovascular capacity wise, the longer that warm-up needs to be. So you've probably noticed that if you warm up for 15 to 20 minutes on a bike or a row or a treadmill or something before you go and work out, it primes your heart rate into that kind of upper 80th percentile, somewhere around there. You might even do a little touch the red zone for a minute kind of thing at the end, right? And then you go into your dynamic exercises to prepare your body for movement, right? Kind of duplicating the movement patterns that you're going to do for whatever the high intensity intervals are. That is exactly the same way I train, Matthew. I start my strength training, high intensity intervals the exact same way, because if I do not get an appropriate warm up, let's just say I just jump in and maybe I warmed up for 5 minutes and I go through my dynamic movement exercises and I get into trying to push myself into that yellow or red zone, maybe upper yellow, red zone, kind of that border of where you can still hang on to the technique and still feel like, okay, I barely got it. Let me try to squeeze out a few more reps. If I don't have that appropriate warm-up, you're right, it feels like way, way, way more work. And it is, because you haven't primed your heart to recognize this is what we're doing. We're going to work hard and we're going to load some capacity up. And once your heart goes, yeah, okay, I got it. This is what we're doing. It goes, yep, we're just going to hover up here. And that's when you go and you get into that green and yellow and red. And it's kind of no problem getting, going in and out of your intervals, recovering down back into the green and blue, and then getting it back up into yellow quickly, no matter what you're doing. So warm up is so important. And I wish that more boutique studio programs would put an emphasis on that. If you are more fit, you need to show up earlier and you need to warm up for at least 10 to 15 minutes longer than those people that are brand new. Because think about it. The people that are brand new, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes in, they're already going, this is near the end of my capacity that I can handle right now. And for anybody who's really fit with a high endurance capacity, they walk into a program like that and they go, well, okay, there's the warm up. Great. Okay, and now I start working out. I still need to get warmed up. I'm still warming up here. Like my heart rate is still climbing. I'm still going up and up over this first 15, 20 minutes. Nothing's going to get my heart rate to climb unless I'm really pressing it, right? So yeah, we want to get for those who are more fit, those individuals have higher physiological capacity, take more time to slowly build up that heart rate. Take 15, 20 minutes to get on a bike, a treadmill, a rower, whatever it is, a ski erg, and ease your way into it. The first 2 minutes that you do anything, your body's just waking up, and all of the internal processes are happening in your body to where it's vasodilation is starting to happen, and our veins and arteries are starting to get bigger so we can transport blood. All these things are turning up and waking on for those first 2 minutes. And so, even for somebody who's brand new, 5 minutes is kind of the minimum warm up, and then get into the dynamic stuff, because we have to get people's heart rates, regardless of their level of fitness, to be somewhere in that middle upper yellow zone before we even start doing the high intensity interval training. And like I said, for the people who are less fit, going to happen way sooner, within a couple minutes. And the people who are more fit, 15 to 20 minutes warm up before they even get started. So yeah, like I said, you figured it out. for yourself. That's exactly what you need to do in order to have your heart rate work more, burn more calories, get more out of that, and feel like you have more control over all of those exercises at that higher rate, right? You feel like at 88, 89, 90%, you're still going, yep, I got this. I can still hang on. And then you get to 92, 93, and you start going, I don't know. And then 94, 95 come, and you're pretty much, it's out the window by that time, right? You got to stop the exercise.
So how do you fit strength training in there? Because again, for me, that same approach works a lot better. But I've also read that people don't recommend pushing too much on the strength side. So where do you sit on that? Like once you're warmed up and you're doing whether it's intervals or HIIT training, how
Yeah.
do you feel about throwing weight around, and what's good? How what kind of rep range should you be looking at for your
And
strength side?
that's another great question. I think, again, that comes down to what you're training for. And most importantly, knowing that is what you're doing working towards your goals for whatever they are. And in my opinion, if you're not going to be playing a sport that requires you to move somebody else's body around, if you don't have to physically push another 100, 150, 200 pounds around, then why are you practicing lifting that much weight? For me, you really should be training for what your specific goals are. And if your specific goals are to get more fit, then throwing 150, 200 pounds over your head isn't necessarily going to give you the type of training goals that you're after. While it might make you stronger, it doesn't necessarily allow you to handle a higher capacity for a longer duration. And there's a certain style of strength training out there right now, which I won't throw the name out there under the bus, but they go really high intensity for 20 or 30 minutes. And I've noticed that when I challenge those people to go 45, 50 minutes, 60 minutes at a similar or slightly lower intensity, they break after 30 minutes because they're so used to training at that same capacity, that same duration. That similarity in that programming forces them to adapt to only being able to be good at handling that intensity. And anything beyond that volume of intensity becomes something challenging that the body hasn't adapted to being able to handle. So it really comes down to, for me specifically, training for life. What am I training for in particular? And this goes for most people, the general population out there. Most of them just need to be good at being able to move 20 to 40 pounds around. And if you can move around 20 to 40 pounds effectively throughout all your body's different ranges of motion, for most people, that's going to be enough weight, depending on the combination of exercises within their intervals, to elevate their heart rate to a level that's considered high intensity. And really, that's all we're looking for. And keep in mind, high intensity doesn't always have to be the highest of the highest, hardest maximum effort. It just has to be within that range. And anywhere within that range is going to provide you with beneficial training adaptation. So yes, sometimes a little bit heavier, but most of the time pretty moderate loads. And I really appreciate the value of functional training. So when I'm creating programs, I'm trying to compile exercises in an arrangement that challenges really dynamic physicality of people. So it's not just one or two muscle groups that we're going to be challenging. It's going to be a full body dynamic exercise that might require a lot of balance and recruitment of other muscles, where you might think you're only working this one or two muscle groups, but your whole body's got to work a little bit. And people always go, why does my heart rate skyrocket so much when I'm doing, a balance exercise with a 20-pound kettlebell? Why am I in the red zone? And that's because your body's not used to doing that, for one. And two, every muscle in your body is working a little bit to coordinate that balance. And although, that one muscle group doesn't feel like it's getting taxed to, a point of exertion that you have to stop, your heart's going, oh man, I've got to keep up with all of this oxygen that I've got to transfer to all these muscles that are working a little bit, even though it's not just this one muscle. So again, it comes down to, what are you training for? What are your goals? And for most people, it's general fitness. I want to go out there and play all the activities and sports and be good at it. So my suggestion in terms of combination, when you're talking about how am I putting together my weekly regimen, I would say most people probably put, 4 to 7 hours a week to their training regimen, somewhere around there. And that's a perfectly acceptable amount if you're not training for anything in particular, sport specific, competition wise. Anytime we're talking about competition, now we've got to get this program dialed in specific to whatever we're going to be competing in. But if you're just training for life and, you want to get out and be better at, like, the Tough Mudder and Spartan races and all that kind of stuff, which is what a lot of people are competing in when they're not, super serious, competitive athletes, right? You've got to have an endurance capacity. Everything we do requires an endurance capacity. So you have to have that sustained portion of the cardiovascular part of your regimen. You have to have some high intensity interval training because of its advantage of efficiency of training. So when we're only training 4 to 7 hours a week, we got to go, how do I get the most bang for my buck? How do I get the most out of this hour that I'm going to come train? And a lot of times, if you're only putting in 4 to 7 hours a week, your strength training should be high intensity interval training. Every strength training session that you do, because it's probably only going to be 2 or 3 sessions, maybe 4, should be a high intensity interval training session that challenges your body through all kinds of dynamic ranges of motion and movement patterns. Target the sagittal plane, the frontal plane, the transverse plane. Get a full body workout every time you go and train your body, because ideally we're strength training every body part at minimum 2 times per week. So if we do a full body high intensity workout 3 times a week, and we've got maybe 2 or 3 sustained endurance days, plus remember that 20-minute warm up before our maybe 40-minute high intensity interval training session. Throw in a yoga day focusing, or Pilates focusing on mobility, because that's a huge section missing from people's regimen. They get so caught up in trying to be in the yellow and red. You have to pay attention to the mobility and the flexibility. As we build strength, as we, challenge our bodies and break our bodies down and they rebuild, if we're not paying attention to mobility, every time we exercise on a microscopic level, time after time after time, our mobility is getting smaller and smaller and smaller unless you actually focus on it every time you work out. So, that's part of that daily regimen as well. So we've got our warm up for that strength training session. We get the bulk of the workout. Well, first we started with the dynamic, then we get the bulk of the workout, and then we do the static stretching at the end. You've got to spend 5 minutes just stretching out the hips primarily. Because those are the muscles that are most important for the recruitment of muscles involved in pretty much every movement we do. And that's where most people are tight, is in the hips. That's going to cause the most issues in terms of injuries.
So how will you then define sort of interval training from high intensity interval training based on what we said before? Because I guess sort of regular interval training, if you're not working up, could they could arguably be the same thing, couldn't they? Or is there a specific way that you describe
them? They're very similar. Yeah, they're very similar. So regular interval training really is you're basically just specifying time. Interval training is just a time of time that you're working, a work duration, and then there's a rest duration. And you have to have the rest duration. If you don't have the rest duration, then it's not interval training. I've seen a lot of programs out there where, during the rest duration, they'll have you do something else. And technically, that's not interval training. You're still just working. And typically, when we're interval training, you want to challenge yourself a little bit more. So we try to choose loads and speeds and durations and things that are going to challenge ourselves with that interval, right? We want to get up, into that working range. And again, depending on your level of fitness, some people are going to skyrocket that heart rate immediately a lot higher. Some people, it takes a little bit longer for their heart rate to climb. So the length of that interval makes a big difference in that overall amount of volume that you're placing on the heart. Most people do really well with 1 to 4 minute intervals. Anything above 4 minute intervals really is challenging for somebody who's brand new. But for somebody, let's say, who has a much higher endurance capacity, they might do very well with 5, 6, 7 minute intervals. And again, it always comes down to your ability to sustain or maintain technique. Once you lose the technique, the exercise must be modified. It's either stopped or it's modified to allow you to either decrease your heart rate to a level that allows you to sustain the technique, or it's stopped entirely because you're just going to put yourself at too high of risk for injury. And that's one thing that I think people need to be really concerned with at the upper end of their high intensity intervals, because someone who's really fit has challenged their body to tolerate that high intensity interval capacity for longer. And they're going to be in a group, let's say maybe of a bunch of people, and there's all kinds of different levels of fitness. And the people who are less fit, they see that person who's more fit doing this exercise, looking like they're crushing it with great technique. They can obviously tell that they're working hard, and they feel like they need to keep up with that person, even though they're at an entirely different level. And then they look up at the screen and they see both of their heart rates side by side, and they look at that person and they go, well, that person's in the middle of the yellow zone and I'm in the middle of the red zone. What's going on here? Why am I working so much harder than they are? And it's just a matter of physiological capacity and what that individual person is able to handle. And so even though that person is in the middle of the yellow zone and it looks like they're crushing it, and they are crushing it, they are working really hard for themselves. Anybody who has a very high endurance capacity knows how challenging it is for you to get into that red zone. It takes a lot of extra effort for you to get there, right? And when you get those like 2 or 3 minutes in red in your 60-minute workout, you guys got it. Yeah, finally I nailed it, right? And a lot of times in interval training, when you're more fit, it's very challenging for you to get yourself to get into that red zone because your heart's so used to going, nope, I got this. Nope, I got this. Nope, we're at 89 still. We're not quite in the red zone yet. So it just gets really good at
I've seen a lot of
recognizing right
arguments
away.
with people in some of these classes where they're like, "Oh, your
Yeah,
belt's not right, or you've not put put
yeah.
the right
And that's
thing in."
not it. You know,
And
it's
I guess it
again,
must be difficult because what you're saying, it's very personal. When you're looking at these, and I suppose in a lot of facilities, everybody's kind of, we're all got belts, we're all looking at screens, we're all kind of tracking our zones, we're all doing the same
mhm,
workouts. How
mhm.
can you, what in your experience saying, because obviously, there's a lot of businesses out there doing this. How can you structure in a way where you are catering for the needs? You're not putting people in a position they shouldn't be in,
Yep.
and it's as effective as it can be. Or are you saying, it's, if you are doing that, you're probably better off, having one-on-one coaching for something like that?
No, there's always room, regardless of where you land on the bell curve of fitness. There's always room for everybody to work together. It just comes down to the ability of the coach to be able to offer appropriate modifications to everybody. And so that's going to be the biggest thing that gets more uniformity in the reflection of what you're seeing up on the screen when you're looking at all these different tiles. And when you're trying to have everybody be in close to the same colors, it depends on what everybody's doing. So, for example, you might have one interval challenge people a lot more than the next interval. One interval might challenge, might be an explosive power interval, where the next interval might be more focused on balance, strength, coordination. So you look up at the screen and you've got all these different colors of blue, green, yellow, red. And the coach is supposed to go, well, how do I give the modification to let people know where they're supposed to go? And ultimately, it comes down to how well does the coach know the individual? And so that's kind of, for me, that goes down to coaching 101. Everybody who comes to your class, you should know exactly the details about their journey. You should know, where are they on their journey? Are they just starting? Are they 3 months in? Are they 6 months in? What does their regimen look like? What are they capable of doing? How does their body usually respond to certain exercises? What are they coordinated at? Where are their muscular imbalances? Are they more flexible, less flexible? And really what it comes down to is, the more tools that coach has in their tool belt to offer unique modifications based off of all those things, the better a job they're going to do at allowing that person to make just the right adjustment to get their heart rate to now climb or drop down to where you want it to be. And I think probably the easiest thing to remember when it comes to coaching multiple individuals is, as coaches, we can look around the room, and most of the time we can pretty well, those of us who have been doing it for a long time, ballpark somebody's general fitness level once we start to see them move. We can tell how coordinated they are, looking at their heart rate when it elevates. How is it elevating? Is it elevate right away? Okay, they don't have as great of cardiovascular capacity. Does it take a while for it to elevate? Okay, well, so as a coach, we start to analyze all these things, and every individual in your class, you should kind of know what they're capable of doing. And now when you're walking around the room, no matter what station they're at, no matter what exercise they're doing, you can quickly look at this person and go, you need to do this, X, Y, and Z. You should change your weight to that. That's going to help you. Then move on to the next person. Take a look. evaluate what is their biomechanic, where's their center of gravity, does their technique look right, is their heart rate where you want it to be right now? Are we right at the beginning of the interval? And are they still in the green? That's fine. Are we in the middle of the interval and they're still in the green? Well, maybe we can challenge them a little bit more. Are they in the middle of the interval and they're in the yellow? Perfect. That's right where I want you to be. Now, we've got 1 more minute, let's say, left in the interval, and they have one more exercise that they need to get to, and they're the 85%. Perfect. I'm not going to change a thing because I want you to move on to that next exercise, have your heart rate climb a few more percentages, and by the end of that interval, you're going to be maybe 88, 89%. Perfect. You're still going to be able to maintain your technique. You're going to be challenged appropriately. And as a coach, I was able to come by and offer a slight modification, maybe or maybe not, that allowed you to continue your heart rate trajectory throughout the rest of the duration of that interval. So again, depending on the length of the interval, that's going to be kind of how you start to structure the exercises that you're putting in. One more thing
Sounds
too,
like
when it comes
there's
to
a
those
lot.
exercises. I was just going to say one more thing. When you're creating a program that's for everyone, regardless of the fitness level, you got to remember you have to include mostly exercises that everybody can do. And then you have to, with those exercises, have multiple modifications then that will challenge people on both ends of the bell curve. How far can I dial it back? And how far can I crank it up for those who need it?
It sounds like there's a lot to it. Certainly a lot more than meets the eye. Obviously, there's I guess there's quite a big popularity in HIIT training and heart zone training. We're all, most of the people who are in the industry have seen that. But I think what you're saying is there's quite a bit more that goes into it to be effective and safe and to cater for everybody. I know there's certain types of training concepts out there that you sort of referred to earlier, which I guess, depending on your level of fitness, you may have to be careful about who actually goes in and gets involved in those. So what's your assessment then, without sort of upsetting anybody, but, what's your assessment of at the moment with a lot of these types of heart rate training concepts? Is it fine because most of them are fairly dumbed down in terms of what they're doing, or do you think, and I guess this is what probably you do as a business, do you think there's more education required to be able to provide a better product for people?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Education across the board, education for the coaches, and then access to education for every participant. Because it's just as important that they know how to self-modify and start to make selections that allow them to hopefully make a change before the coach even comes over and recognizes it. Because ultimately, that's what a good coach does. They teach people to become self-sustainable. Yes, there's some people that always need to be pushed in certain scenarios, and some people just do better with the coach. But ultimately, the coach is educating the participant. They're educating that person to be able to understand why you're choosing to have them do certain things. And if they understand why you're making those decisions, then they'll be more inclined to make the right decision when they recognize something isn't necessarily what they want it to be in any given interval, wherever they're at. So people can start to self-coach a little bit more, which ultimately ends up helping the coach in the long run, because people will get more out of their workout if they can get themselves dialed in a little bit more. And then if the coach can come along and still offer some, maybe some technical modifications or things that help them with their biomechanics, fantastic. But the more we can educate people across the board, and that's owners and operators too, from a programming standpoint, understanding what they're trying to deliver, and then understanding who they're hiring. Are they hiring the right people to deliver this program? Because there's, like we've talked about, there's a lot of very robust programs out there, and there's a lot of programs out there that are kind of cookie cutter. And really, the bottom line is there's a lot of coaches out there too. Some coaches are great, and some coaches are pretty good. And if your program doesn't necessarily take a great coach to deliver the experience, then you might be able to get away with a good coach rather than a great coach, because the great coaches are harder to find. But that's where I found my niche in the industry is, if only we could all be great coaches, if only every coach out there could have all of those skill sets that we look for that help somebody lead and control the environment of a room, with the appropriate motivation, the right skill set to offer the right modifications. If only every coach, really was so focused on coaching every time they coached and had the best intentions in mind to get their participants everything out of that session every single time they coach, I think everybody's going to get a lot more out of it. So yeah, education is a huge part of it. And coming kind of back to the beginning of our conversation where we started, I think that is one of the biggest missing links in our industry right now. I've seen a ton of great equipment out there. I've seen a lot of pretty good programs out there too that might need some tweaking here or there. And, then we're getting into franchising and, what you can change after you franchise and stuff like that. And so there's certain limitations that some companies have. They can only go so far outside of the box. But to anybody who's looking to innovate, and anybody who's looking to, add more depth to their programming, there is a ton of room for potential. There's a ton of room for potential for to get your programming more dialed in specifically, and there's a ton of room for potential for you to increase skill set of the delivery of the capability of your coaches that you have delivering that program. And if we can get everybody delivering the experience, coaching the way they should be coaching, offering the right modifications, everybody wins across the board.
So in terms of technology out there, I've read a bunch of the stuff that you talk about, and I know like wearables are very popular at the moment, but there's a number of different types, from what you put on your wrist to what you put on your as a chest strap. What's been your experience in terms of accuracy and relevance as it relates to finding a good, without naming any names, but what should you be looking for a good heart rate monitor?
I think that one too comes down to what are you going to be doing with this heart rate monitor? And if your goal is to do high intensity interval training, functional training, you're going to be moving around a lot. There's a lot of moving pieces, parts, equipment, etc. You are going to want a heart rate monitor that's not around your wrist. You're going to want a heart rate monitor that goes around your chest. The difference between the two is the heart rate monitor that goes around your chest is an actual EKG. We're getting the actual electrical signal from the SA node in the heart, so we're getting that electrical impulse of the heartbeat. Where the thing you're wearing around your wrist is measuring your pulse pressure, and it's taking basically it's using light to measure the pulse pressure in your radial pulse or anywhere else in your wrist that it's measuring that from. And so the further away you get from the heart, the more not only skewed that signal is, but it has more room for error, because now we're relying also on the vascular compliance of our veins and arteries. And people who are more fit have greater vascular compliance, and people who are less fit have less vascular compliance, meaning their veins and arteries are less likely to expand and contract when you want them to. So there's just more margin for error with the wrist, and especially when you're coming into functional training, having your wrist moved around. If you're doing boxing or kickboxing stuff, there's a lot of margin for error of jarring and moving around that. And the wrist wearable typically has to be worn fairly tight to get a good reading. And I just don't like having something around my wrist, so I prefer wearing something around my chest. I know a lot of people will complain about wearing something around their chest, but for me, it's like you. I've been wearing a heart rate monitor for a long time now, and I kind of feel, for me, it's like a seatbelt. When I'm not wearing a seatbelt in the car, it feels really weird. It feels like I'm naked. It's like the same thing with training now. If I don't have my heart rate monitor on, I feel like something's wrong, and something's not right here. And then get the heart rate monitor on. Okay, now I'm ready to go. In terms of accuracy, though, I would say you want to always measure the EKG. If you're really after accuracy, if you're really after accurate peaks and balances in what is already an indirect measurement, because we're waiting for that heart rate response, right? We want that to be as accurate as possible. So I prefer the chest strap. It's the most diverse across the board. You can literally do any type of training with that chest monitor on. I don't care if you're biking, running, rowing, swimming, waterproof, you can get all of that. High intensity interval training. the sky's the limit with diversity of training. So that's another thing too. If you're just going to be going for walks, yeah, you can get away with the wrist strap. If you're going to go and just ride a bike, sure, you could probably get away with the wrist monitor. But if you've got a really diverse training regimen, you want something that can give you more accuracy and handle the diversity of the program without giving you inaccuracies along the way.
One of the questions that came in on social media when we published this interview was coming along was about the fat burn zone. So you see it on a lot of cardio. This is the zone you need to get in. What's your thoughts on? Is there such a thing as a fat burn zone? And if so, what if people want to burn fat? Where should they be?
Wow, now we're diving into exercise and nutrition both. I always find it funny to see the caloric expenditure on machines and the differences between those caloric expenditures based off of just kind of the general user metrics that they would use. And sometimes you enter your information in, and the machines will give you a readout of your heart rate or your caloric expenditure and things of that nature, right? But yeah, it's. I'm sorry, what was the question again?
So is it why it's on all cardio? Why is it on there? Is it legit? What are some of the takeaways that we could get from these fat burn zones that seem to be on
The fat burning
most
zone.
equipment
Sorry,
nowadays?
Yeah, I was thinking too much about the heart, the entering your metrics into the cardio equipment and how wildly inaccurate some of those are. But yeah, the fat burning zone. To answer your question, so not technically, there's not really a fat burning zone. Your body is always just burning energy, and your body is going to look for whatever type of energy is readily available to it. And most of the time, the easiest energy for our body to burn is sugars, carbohydrates. Your body will easily break down and burn carbohydrates at a very high, rapid rate, where fat is more of a slow burning fuel. And people, used to hear that a lot. I feel like in the 90s and kind of 2000, where you hear people talking about, oh, the fat burning zone, the cardio zone, the fat burning zone, all these different zones that you have to be in. Well, if you want to be in fat, you got to be in this more moderate intensity. That's not true. Anything that you do is going to burn calories, and your body is going to burn energy, and your body is going to look to replace those energy stores. And it's going to replace those energy stores with the food that you consumed and the energy stores that you have on your body. And most of those energy stores that you have on excess energy stores that you have on your body is stored in the form of fat. So that's why I say this is also a two-part. It's also a nutrition conversation, because now we're talking about, if people want to lose fat, their goal needs to be to, on a daily consistent basis, have a caloric deficit. And if they have a caloric deficit, then they can take their basal metabolic rate, which is however many calories their body will consume on a regular daily basis without doing any exercise at all. And then they can take the amount of energy, the calories that they'll burn within that actual training session. Let's call it an hour long. And so let's just say, for all intents and purposes, average male burns 2,000 calories a day, we'll just say, for easy math. And then they go and work out, and let's just call it 1,000-calorie workout that they do. Well, if that person wants to lose fat, then they have to eat food throughout the day, of course, but they're going to want to be in a caloric deficit that allows their body to digest all of the food that they put in, and then replace some of those energy stores with the fuel that they still have on their body, which is going to come in the form of the fat that they have on their body. So if a person could get into a roughly 300 to 500 calorie caloric deficit when they're trying to lose fat, that's going to be a safe, sustainable amount of caloric deficit for them to actually make a lifestyle change that's sustainable, a nutritional lifestyle change that's sustainable, rather than doing some of these crash diets that are like 1,000, 1,200 calories a day, which you're burning more calories just sitting on your butt doing nothing. And this is way too big of a caloric deficit. And now we're talking about ketosis and all these other things that cause your body to go through all these crazy cycles, when really it becomes about sustainability. You're going to have to live the rest of your life. What are you doing that's going to allow you to live the rest of that life and sustain your lifestyle? Are you doing things that are sustainable for the rest of your life? So ultimately, that's the key. Crash diets don't work. The right nutrition does work, because that's what you're going to be doing forever, is eating right and exercising. And so when you're trying to lose weight, if you can get into a caloric deficit, then you can have a roller coaster of all kinds of different intensities, and you should. So you can train your body to being able to handle all these different types of intensities. All these different intensities are going to challenge your body to grab fuel from different areas. So it's been shown, research has shown that high intensity interval training mobilizes fatty acid oxidation in central adipose tissue. So great. So we can do high intensity interval training to burn fat. We can do all of these types of training to burn fat. It really comes down to, are you consuming more calories per day than you're burning? And if you are, then you're going to keep gaining fat. You're not going to lose fat. And if you can get into that slight caloric deficit, not a huge one, but a slight one, that becomes something that is sustainable. And you can do that for months, years on end if you need to. And then it's just about getting the right amount of exercise, the right amount of nutrition. And if we're talking about calories, you better be wearing a heart rate monitor, because we want to know for every exercise you're doing, what is that caloric expenditure? How many extra calories do I need that day? What's my caloric deficit if I'm trying to lose fat? If I'm trying to gain muscle, it's the opposite. I need a little bit extra every day, right? So there's just all these checks and balances that we have to go through uniquely, individually, to make sure somebody's on their right journey. And ultimately, that's going to be what allows them to lose fat. It's not the zone that you're staying in on a treadmill, however many X amount of beats per minute. That's not, if you come in and do that every single day, I guarantee you're going to lose less fat than having a lot of variety and diversity in your training regimen. You know why? It's because your body is going to come in and it's going to go, yep, I recognize this. I know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to do 45 minutes on the elliptical. It's going to be moderate intensity, and that's all I have to do. And your body goes, cool, I got this. I know exactly how many calories I need to burn. I know exactly how much energy this takes. I have found homeostasis here. I know how to do this. But when you're constantly doing all kinds of different things and challenging your body to all these different varieties of intensity, it's always going, oh, I can't adapt. I don't know what this is. I've got to try. So then it has to get good at recognizing all of these different intensities, matching all of these different intensities with appropriate energy expenditure, and then replenishing those energy stores with appropriate fuel. So put good nutrition in your body. Put high octane fuel in your body. The better nutrition you put in your body, the faster you're going to recover, the better all of this is going to be.
Fantastic. So a couple of questions before we wrap up. But before that, I'd just like to maybe sort of share a little bit of information about how people can find out a little bit more about you and some of the workshops and programs that you've got at the moment.
Currently, because of the whole COVID thing, I'm not doing a lot of live workshops. Previously, I was doing loads of live workshops for Life Fitness and Team ICG. I'm an international mastery trainer for Team ICG and Life Fitness, and I recently have created an educational webinar for my zone. So we have dove a little bit deeper into the education being delivered to gym owners, operators, coaches, etc., who are utilizing MyZone in their facilities. So we've got a nice 4-hour webinar to educate you on heart rate training, on how to apply it to your facility. So keep a lookout for that via an email from MyZone that would come out some point in the near future. We've been doing those. It seems like every 6 to 8 weeks or so. So we'll be doing another one shortly there. People can reach out to me at fitnessdeconstructed.com if they want to learn a little bit more about how I give back to coaches in the community. Right now, it's mostly educational pieces that I'm putting out, blogs, things like that. But like I said, I'll be launching some training programs coming up here very soon. You can always pick up my book, The Ultimate Heart Rate Training Guide, on my website as well. But ultimately, I like to have a platform, kind of my website and my social media platform, coach.jesse if you're on Instagram, or at Fitness Deconstructed. Any one of those spaces, I really just try to elevate coaches as much as I can. You know, I've come across coaches in the past that they try to hide all their tools and they want to keep it all to themselves. And for me, I've got so much knowledge to share because I've spent so many years in school and so many years just, being a science geek about all of this training, that I just want to give back and I want to help coaches as much as I can. And so that's really, for the past few years, I started Fitness Deconstructed 3 years ago. And the whole goal was to be able to affect positive change into as many lives as I possibly could. And that meant branching out and doing contract work with lots of the big equipment manufacturers in the industry, who are creating great pieces of equipment, and then education around that equipment, whether it's heart rate monitors, power meters. It's really fun for me to be able to create the education and then go and train the coaches to be able to implement not only the type of training that we're after, but the overall arching experience, because that's a big portion of what we're doing in the fitness industry. It can be all science and numbers and geek stuff, and I love that all day long, but there's so many people that need to be entertained while they exercise and need to have that some sort of entertainment value to their exercise just to get them in the front door. So that's kind of what I've been helping companies do, is rein in their ability to create that experience that's hopefully going to help them with their attrition numbers, but ultimately provide that program out there that not a lot of other companies are doing, or not a lot of other companies are really delivering at the level that they're trying to do. So yeah, that's what I do mostly. I still do some coaching as well, individual, team, group coaching. The whole COVID thing has led me to doing more online virtual coaching, which is fun. I didn't think I would enjoy it as much as I am. I can still pretty effectively coach biomechanics through the computer screen, so that's going well, and a little bit of in-person coaching at parks and here and there. But ultimately, writing a lot of blogs these days for a lot of those bigger players in the industry, and just ultimately trying to give back education-wise to the coaches and help people accelerate their ability to be able to affect more positive change into others' lives.
Okay, excellent. So just a couple more then. These are sort of selfish ones for a few of my friends and family that we're working out with. So as it relates to MyZone, then we've touched on it a little bit, but in terms of recovery, what are some of the things that we should be looking at? Because we are, I love MyZone, but if you're competitive, it's a nightmare. You're always trying to get your points, and so I want to balance that now. I've done it for a long time. I think it's great, but I want to be able to recognize, when I'm probably pushing it too much. And as I said, we've touched on it a little bit, but what are a few takeaways that anyone's listening to this could go and apply straight away to help them, look at their charts and say, well, this is when I'm probably pushing myself too much. Any advice you can give on that front at all, Jesse?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And there's going to be a lot of people who are running into that issue. It comes down to, again, that volume of work that you're putting in, the total hours of work that you're putting in. And one of the things that you should really be concerned with, listen to your body. If your body is telling you, oh, I just don't have it in me today to push myself that hard, you probably should not push yourself that hard that day. We can strap our heart rate monitor on and we can easily see that if we're starting this workout and we're 10% higher than we normally are, if we're not starting this workout somewhere in the 40, 50th percentile, we should all be walking around at about that. If you're starting this in the blue zone already, something's up. You got to look at what you've done for the past 2 days in a row. And I think it's most important for people who are exercising back to back to back to back to back throughout the week to recognize the importance of the variety of that training regimen. So if you're getting 1 or 2 back-to-back days of high intensity interval training in a row, you can get away with that, but that third day really needs to be something different. Either get that moderate, sustained cardiovascular endurance exercise, or have a lower intensity, more mobility exercise. Maybe it's more moderate intensity strength, balance, and coordination type exercises, but really look to have a roller coaster of intensity in your training regimen. Even though I know a lot of times it's about racking up those points, keep in mind, the longer you're working out, the more points you're going to rack up. And when you work out at higher intensities, that means you're going to be working out for a shorter duration because you only have so much gas in the tank. And if you're working out at a lower intensity, you could work out for a longer duration if you have the time to do it. Yes, it means it takes more time to earn those MyZone effort points. But it's more important to have variety and diversity in your training regimen than it is to get 50, 20, 50, 75 extra points. I think that if you can get the minimum, that's the bare minimum that you should get 1,300 points a month. We should 1,350. Everybody should be doing that. Most people should be getting 2,000 to 3,000 MEPs per month. And so with the variety that they're putting in throughout the week, that shouldn't be a problem. If you're getting 3 or 4 higher intensities and maybe 1 or 2 lower intensity days, everyone's going to get the amount of points. Does that mean that you win? Maybe, maybe not. If you're in a competition, maybe you have to put in more hours that day, that month, that week, whatever. Again, though, you have to pay attention to your own body. So if you're uber competitive, be aware. If you wake up that morning and you're on day 3 or day 4 of back to back to back of whatever it is that you're doing, and you start exercising and you're warming up and you just don't feel it that day, listen to your body. Go slower that day. Take it easy. Don't push yourself. You're not gonna get any more out of the workout by pushing yourself harder that day. You're actually probably going to work against yourself, because you're probably going to be putting yourself, depending on what you're doing, at higher risk for injury, because your technique is going to be harder to sustain because you can't handle that intensity as well that day. So just opt for something lower intensity. There's nothing wrong with that. People get so caught up in having to be in the yellow and red zone. I would say half of my workouts are mostly blue and green, and the other half of my workouts are mostly yellow or red, because I want that variety. I want those lower moderate intensity days in between my higher intensity days, because I know that I perform a lot better on those high intensity days if I have appropriate recovery in between. And if you want to get more out of your regimen and you want your body to be able to adapt, listen to your body. Watch for those telltale signs of overtraining. Keep track of how many hours a week you're putting into your training regimen. Take a look at your weekly lineup. Look at those days in a row. What do those workouts look like? Start to have a plan of attack and a strategy when you're formulating your weekly regimen, for you to have the appropriate amount of variety on that roller coaster of intensity throughout the week. And if you can get an appropriate amount of variety, you're going to be way less likely to be putting yourself at high risk of overtraining. And then we have to really consider all those other environmental factors, right? The overall sleep, hydration, nutrition, recovery. One thing to touch on sleep, most people exercise for about an hour or less per day. If that's what you're doing, you can get away with 7 or 8 hours of sleep. But if you're somebody who's investing 2 or more hours a day into your training regimen, and those are more moderately high exercise, even if you got one high intensity, in the morning, and then maybe you're doing 2 a day, you've got something going on in the afternoon where you're, doing maybe your sustained cardio or yoga, something like that. All of those hours add up. Your body needs to recover. So if you're working multiple hours one day, get 8 or 9 hours of sleep that night, because your body needs it. And if you don't work out to that same intensity or that same volume the next day. Have a more moderate day the next day. Have intention in and trying to create that regimen to have enough variety to allow you to work out back to back to back on days without having to worry about, am I overtraining or am I pushing myself too hard? But ultimately, listen to your body.
And if you're on that sort of, if you're sort of 15 minutes into your workout, like I have been sometimes, and you think, right, I'm in my warm-up stage and I'm sort of, about in the low greens, for example, that doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong. It just probably means that your body's tired and you probably need to just take it easy and then maybe come back, have a day off or something like that.
Right. And don't necessarily not work out that day. You can definitely still work out that day, but maybe that day's mostly in the green. Maybe you're just working on your steady state that day. Maybe you're switching to a few different pieces of cardio equipment, just kind of taking it easy and getting some of that volume and pressure overload that's going to, help the neurological system in the heart. But not necessarily the musculature of the heart in this case, right? We don't want to overwork it too much. We can work it a little bit and it'll be fine, but we're not going to stress it so much that it goes, I can't keep up. And now I'm at an even more broken down state and I've got to recover even more. If we're working at those moderate levels of intensity, the body doesn't need as much recovery. So you can jump in 15 minutes in, notice that I'm kind of not feeling it in the green zone. I really don't feel like I have it in me today to push myself that hard. Take it easy. So what? Take it easy, go home, drink a bunch of water, get a good night's sleep, eat a good meal. Tomorrow's a new day. wake up and see how you're feeling the next
Mm.
day. And if you feel recovered and rested, you strap your heart rate monitor on, you start moving, and you're feeling like, yep, I got it today. Perfect. You recovered. It's go time. Let's do it. So find that everyone's got a different balance that works for them, right? Some people put in more or less hours.
Mm.
Find what works for you. And the older we get, typically the more dialed in we get that, and the more we recognize what our body needs and what it doesn't need. Listen to your body, though. You have to listen and pay attention.
And can that have you is there a connection between heart rate and actually sort of breaking down your ability to fight disease as well? Like can you use it there? Like we're talking about COVID at the moment, but I guess if you are stressing your body, you're gonna open yourselves up to things like that. Is there anything that you've seen a correlation between those?
Well, any type of elevated heart rate, one of the most common things is atrial fibrillation, AFib, which is really common in people. Occasionally they'll see, spikes in their heart rate all of a sudden out of nowhere. My heart rate's jacked up and I'm not even doing anything. There's certain little things like that's not so little. That could potentially be a big deal. That might be something that you would want to go get checked out. In fact, anybody who has any type of atrial fibrillation should go get it checked out by a doctor to see how severe it is. Because worst case scenario, atrial fibrillation, which is you've got the atria of the heart and the ventricles of the heart, and the atrias of the heart is where the SA node is, and that's where that initial signal of the heart sends that signal to the atrium to contract to send blood to the ventricles, and then one of the ventricles sends it to the heart and does the whole circulatory system. But if atrial fibrillation is happening, then the aorta in the heart is not beating at the rate that it should be to fill the heart and the circulatory system effectively. And so what happens is you end up getting a little bit of blood left over in the atrium because not all of it's being pushed out into the ventricle. And that little tiny bit of blood that's left in the atrium has potential to clot. And if that blood clots and gets pumped up into your brain, that becomes a stroke. And a stroke is a big, massive deal, as we all know. So that's what we want to try to avoid. So if you can use a heart rate monitor to recognize any of those abnormalities or irregularities, whether or not it's something like AFib or just a sign of overtraining, those are all the little details that we should be paying attention to, because our heart is telling us what its condition is in. It's telling us if it's ready to go, and it's telling us if it's not ready to go. And if we've got our heart rate monitor on and it's doing some crazy stuff that's not normal, let's check it out and figure out why that's happening. So sometimes that means going to a doctor. Sometimes atrial fibrillation is really minor and it just means you need to get on some blood thinners to potentially avoid blood clotting, things like that. Atrial fibrillation is also something that I've been really curious about for a long time in terms of training, and how someone can potentially correct atrial fibrillation with appropriate training. Because if you think about it, and an endurance athlete does that really moderate, sustained duration endurance capacity to increase their neurological potential of their heart and their SA node. So if they're doing that to increase their neurological capacity at the high end, why wouldn't that also work for somebody who has a very low physiological capacity? Why wouldn't training at a moderate intensity allow somebody to have a better adaptation to their neurological signal that's being sent to their heart? I would love to see more research being done on that. But in terms of wearing a heart rate monitor to recognize things like that, I think it's hugely important. Every time I work out, I wear my heart rate monitor, not because I want to earn the points, even though I like to earn the points. It's because I want to know exactly how my body is responding that day. And yes, I know, because I'm doing it for a long time, I can feel it. I know what it feels like. Most of the time, I know exactly what percentage I'm at because I know exactly what it feels like. But some days I go, I am not feeling it. And then I look at my heart rate and go, that makes sense. Look at what my heart rate's doing. So you would be behooved to not wear a heart rate monitor if you were trying to track all of these different variables that are going to allow you to get your heart rate or your training regimen dialed in. If that's what you're looking for, if you want to be as efficient and effective as you possibly can when you're training, the heart rate monitor is mandatory to help us dial in all the different aspects of training. And that also includes recovery, and everything that goes along with recovery.
Excellent. So I could go on for hours, but I won't because we've run out of time. But maybe uh, it's you can see it's something I'm trying to learn a lot about, and I'm a real novice on this. But it's yeah, I feel as I'm in a much better place now. Final question then, Jesse, before we finish.
Sure.
Escape Your Limits is about escaping what you've believed is impossible and gone on to make it possible. What would be a memorable example of you escaping your own personal limits?
Good question. Um, I think ultimately, probably a lot of people will choose in this arena of physical limitation. Um, and for me, I would say escaping my limits has been escaping the feeling to need to feel like I need to be working with people who are doing something on a trajectory of a plan of attack that they've had, maybe with a product, just because they're doing well. And I think for me, that escape your limits moment, so to speak, happened when I started my company, Fitness Deconstructed, 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago now. It was my ability to be able to work for myself and decide my own trajectory, my own roadmap, my own path of what I felt was missing from the fitness industry. And I think escaping the limits there was being able to figure out a strategy and a plan of attack that allowed me to do that successfully without making a lot of sacrifices along the way. And anytime we try to make change, there's usually sacrifices that need to be made in order for that change to be happen, in order for that change to happen. And so ultimately, it was about strategizing a way that I could find to be able to have myself offer a lot to different companies while not specifically working with one individual company who maybe had one specific set of plan for whatever their product was. And so escaping my limits came in the form of not working for somebody else and working for myself and being able to do things that I feel are necessary in the industry because they're missing from the industry. And I've just had that kind of personality to where I overanalyze everything in life, and I do that with everything. And with the fitness industry, it's always been about, because when I first graduated from college, this is part of the escape the lens story here. When I first graduated from undergrad, received a Bachelor of Science in Exercise Physiology. All of my instructors, this wasn't a degree that was like other degrees where they have jobs lined up for you as you come out of out of college. Oh, X, Y, and Z jobs are lined up for you. No, my instructors all said the fitness industry is so new; it is what you make of it. Right now, it's nothing, so it's going to be what you make it. And I took that as an opportunity. Most people would shy away from that, and I said, okay, that means it's a sink or swim industry. I'm either going to sink or I'm going to swim. And every day I've been in this industry, it's been about adapting and finding new ways to swim. And I think ultimately that's what, had me continue on this trajectory of having that entrepreneurial mindset of where I was just going to figure out and make it work no matter what. And I think the take home message here for me for Escape Your Limits is don't let society put boundaries and limitations on what you're doing. If you feel passionate about something and you feel that you're right about what you're doing, then figure out a way to get your message out. Figure out how to tell people why it is that you're doing what you're doing. And if people come around and start going, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, then you're on the right track. But you've got to have a roadmap and you can't always just look at what's right in front of you. I always tell people they need to have a plan. They need to have a roadmap. They need to have a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a 1-year plan, a 1-month plan. That plan, that entire plan, you need to try to execute. But you also need to be ready to throw that entire plan out the window and make a brand new plan today, because sometimes that happens. Sometimes we just have to be really good at making lemonade because life is always going to give us lemons. Look at our current scenario. We've got a global pandemic. Everybody in the fitness industry has had to figure out some way to adapt in order to continue to swim. And I know I've talked to a lot of fitness professionals who have found ways to adapt because that's just what they're used to. this type of mentality is not new to people working in the fitness industry. We're always used to sink or swim. We're always used to having to adapt. We're always used to the industry changing every 5 to 10 years and offering new things. So we're always reinventing the wheel and doing things. For me, escaping your limits means never getting comfortable and trying to instead always be uncomfortable and find a way to operate effectively while being uncomfortable. Because as soon as you start to find comfort, somebody else is starting to move ahead of you because they're willing to be uncomfortable. And while comfortable might be easy, the easy stuff is not the stuff that we want, because nothing comes easy. It's always about being able to continue to challenge yourself, because anything worth having takes time, takes patience, and takes consistency.
Fantastic. Well, Jesse, some great words, and thanks for inspiring us at the end. Yeah, good luck with your mission, and thanks again. I recommend everybody checks out the book and looks into you. It's been a great eye opener for me, and yeah, I wish you all the success in what you're doing. Thanks again, Jesse.
Thank you so much, Matthew. It's been such a pleasure having a conversation with you. Definitely looking forward to doing it again sometime. I'm sure we could ramble on for hours about multiple subjects. So it's been fun, and I look forward to doing it again.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, then please go over to iTunes and subscribe to the Escape Your Limits podcast. Leave a review, leave a comment. It really would help us a lot to continue to keep these going.